All right, well, welcome everyone. Today we are going to talk about how to use Microsoft productivity tools and Cisco Webex together. And so basically today we're going to not run more than 55 minutes. We respect your time. We're going to have a lot of information packed into this session with some time for questions and answers at the end. And during the webinar, you can actually use the question link. It's either going to be at the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen, depending on what kind of computer that you have. And we're going to try to answer your questions in the chat. If we can't answer them all live, we'll follow up with you. There's also going to be several polling questions, so be sure to answer those. And a recorded version of this presentation is going to be sent to everyone who is registered within the next few days. So today we have joining us Jeremy Lawrenson, who's a distinguished architect here at Cisco. I'm a product marketing manager for collaboration, and we also have a senior product manager, Michael McGarry, who's going to be joining us to answer some questions about the recent announcements that we had last week on interoperability. So the agenda today, we're going to do a little overview. We're going to talk about integration with Microsoft productivity tools. We're going to talk about how to collaborate using Webex. Then we're going to talk more about the video device interoperability announcement that was made last week, do a little summary and Q&A. So our first polling question is, are you currently deployed using Microsoft Office and/or SharePoint? And Jeremy, maybe I'll ask you, what do you use most? What kind of applications do you use most with Microsoft Office?
Sure. So I'm going to talk about a lot of the different integrations that we do, but probably the biggest thing for me is Microsoft Office, right? So we are a big user inside of Cisco, as you mentioned, of Office 365. All of us have OneDrive, SharePoint, we have the Office suite, and of course we have email as well. But for me, most of it is Word, Excel, PowerPoint, right? The traditional Office stuff. And of course, email, right? Calendaring, everything in my calendar is based on Microsoft Exchange. And so really it's integral to everything that we do. In fact, from a meetings perspective, every meeting I have is obviously on the Microsoft calendar. And so we've been doing quite a bit of integration between the two because we're sort of ground zero for this type of integration.
Well, that is great. And actually, I'm looking at the poll results now, and it looks like 87% of our attendees are doing the same. So we got the right audience.
All right, so let's get into it. Let's get into some of the details here. As was mentioned, my name is Jeremy Lawrenson. I do a lot of work with a lot of different organizations that we have partnerships with. So Microsoft, Google, we run our software runs on iOS, Android. We're integrated into other products as well. But today we wanted to talk very specifically about what we're doing around the Microsoft Productivity Suite. So just wanted to let you know that there is a lot more that we do, because what we're trying to do is integrate to the places where users work, right? Some people work inside of Office, some people work inside of Exchange, some people work inside of things like Salesforce, and we're trying to integrate into the places that people spend their day. And of course, one of those places is the Microsoft Productivity Suite. So as was mentioned before, we are a huge Office 365 shop at Cisco. I like to think of us as ground zero because you use all of the Cisco productivity or Cisco real-time communication tools, meetings, etc., and Teams, and we integrate that for ourselves into the Office platform. And so you can really think of this as us doing these integrations first and foremost so that we can use them. We get a lot of experience under our belts, and we deliver the best experiences, not just for you, but also for us. So this is critically important to how we actually run our business. Now, I have a lot of people when I talk about this sort of integrations ask me, hey, well, you know, I'm trying to figure out which things I'm going to integrate where, and I'd like to know why people are doing this and where they're integrating. Right? There are a lot of choices. I can embed different pieces into other, you know, either into the Microsoft suite, or I can embed things into the Cisco suite, why are people doing these types of integrations? Why are they not just making it simple and saying, well, I'm going to go with one vendor or the other? And there's three major areas that we see people benefiting from putting Cisco and Microsoft together. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of each of these, and then we're going to go into demos and show you how we actually connect the two. But the first example is around cost savings. And as I said, there are a lot of different components to this. But if you look at it, if you just think about the sort of conferencing environment today, we have a lot of customers who are still doing basic web conferences with voice. And in a voice conference, what you're essentially doing is you're creating a VoIP call into your PBX or on-premise or maybe into the cloud. And that's what a lot of people have been doing for many years. And those calls, if you think about it, only took about 80 kilobits of bandwidth per second, which is, not a big deal if you're looking at things like Ethernet and you're connecting to your local PBX. What's happening, though, is there are two shifts in the conferencing environment. The first is a shift to video-first collaboration, and that takes your 80K call up to at least 2 megs. And then the second is that the shift is actually shifting into the cloud. So it used to be that we would have conferencing servers that sat on premise, and whether you did 2 megs or 16 megs into the conferencing server, it wasn't a big deal because it was in your data center. But we're essentially now seeing 40 times the bandwidth, and that's being sent up to the cloud. And the result of this is that you don't get the same sort of quality as you did before. You're having to buy potentially expensive links to get connected better into the cloud. There's a lot of work around SD-WAN that is being done by the networking teams to try and sort of manage this transition. And the result is, delay, packet loss potentially, and additional costs for you. So the example here is that Cisco has an edge connection technology or set of technologies that allow you to connect into the Webex cloud and keep a lot of that on premise. So as an example, I can put a media node into my branch, and if I have 6 people on a conference call in the branch, they will all keep their video local. There's a huge amount more to this, including doing this with video, doing it with voice, but all of those things deliver a better experience, and they also lower the cost. As I said, these things are moving to the cloud and switching over to video. The second example, and this is probably even more important, is this notion of reach. We're finding that it used to be that you could get a lot of work done inside of your organization, and more we're reaching out to third parties, either marketing firms, customers that we deal with, suppliers, and it's no longer the case that all of your business gets done inside of an organization. And so one of the big drivers for delivering Cisco Webex into a lot of these platforms is that Webex is a fantastic platform to connect with people inside your organization as well as outside. Because outside your org, you can't mandate that somebody use one technology or the other. They're going to be using whatever they're using. And so the fact that we exist across Mac, PC, Linux, Android, and iOS, we deliver great services into modern browsers with WebRTC. We support standards-based SIP and even 323 if you still have those devices connecting in, allows you to simply schedule a meeting and know that anybody's going to be able to join. And that's a really big deal in this new age where we even have gig workers who are becoming involved in what we do on a day-to-day basis. And then in addition to that, the simplicity of this all, right? If I'm going to start including people outside my organization, they're not going to get the email that says this is how you work a meeting, or this is how you join the meeting, or this is the client that you need to join the meeting. And so interoperability is a really big deal in terms of letting people do that, but then also making these experiences extremely simple. So for example, if you have a relatively modern Cisco device in your conference rooms, the notion of walking in and the conference room itself saying, hey, would you like to start the meeting? And you just say yes, that is about as easy as the user experience can get. And similarly, if you want to do things like sharing your desktop as an example, similar thing, you walk into the room, you don't have to pair with devices, you don't have to put pins in. Your desktop, your laptop, your mobile device will automatically detect that you're in a meeting room, and you can, for example, with one tap, share your screen into that room. No reason for you to have to work with people to have to figure out, okay, well, how do I connect? And this device doesn't look like the other. And so a huge part of this for customers as they start wanting to push user experience is this notion of extremely simple experiences that we can deliver from a Webex perspective. And of course, that's not just the big room systems. We also have Webex Share that you can plug into a traditional screen to enable that same sort of functionality. So all the way up from a very large installation down to, hey, I got a piece of glass on the wall and I want to be able to just hit the purple share screen button. So these three things factor deeply into the decisions to do this: simplicity, ease of reach, as well as cost savings, and then delivering all of this in a way that is secure. Right? I'm going to share with people outside of my organization. I better make sure that I have security on for that. And that is a huge differentiator for Cisco. So let's have a look at the different integrations that we're doing with Microsoft. And of course, to begin with, we need to get integrated to things like directory. So the first integration that we do with most of our customers is to say, look, we need to connect into your directory for being able to do things like look up users, schedule meetings, authenticate users. So for example, if I have SSO, I need to make sure that I use your two-factor authentication. And so our connection into Azure AD, as well as Active Directory on-premise, as well as Exchange, allows us to deeply integrate into what's the sort of very basic fabric from a Microsoft perspective. And the result of this are great integrations into the products that you know and love. So if you want to schedule a meeting inside of Outlook, in exactly the same way that you would schedule that meeting on any other of the sort of built-in platforms, you're able to schedule a Webex meeting in exactly the same way for your users. All right? A great example of this is the Webex Meetings add-in. I simply create my meeting, I click on the add-in button, and I can now scope what I want that meeting to look like. But even more than that, where you're unable to do add-ins, we make a really big difference. So this is an example of 3 potential calendars that you may very well have, for example, on an iOS device. On the left-hand side, I might have my built-in calendar. In the middle, I have my Exchange calendar, and on the right-hand side, I have my Microsoft Teams calendar. And so users are confused because now there's 3 different places I can look. Do I get meeting reminders from all of those 3 things? And so, as I said, from a simplicity perspective, we put a lot of effort into and thought into how can we simplify this for users. So another great Exchange integration that we do is that you can schedule meetings by simply typing in the location field in any of these calendars the word @Webex or @Meet, and that schedules you a meeting. The upside is I don't need any plugins. It works with any calendar on the device, and from a user's perspective, this is great because I can actually get rid of the 2 on the right. I can stick with the internal calendar that gives me the best experience native to my device, whether it's iOS or an Android calendar for that matter. The next thing that I want to talk about, which I'm going to actually show you a demo of, is the integration of content from the Microsoft platform into Cisco Webex platform. And so for this, what I actually have is I've got Webex Teams here running on my PC. And this is a very common use case from a Cisco perspective. You know, we work in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint all day. And so as an example, I'm going to just quit that for a second and go into PowerPoint here. All documents start off inside of one of the Microsoft applications. And you are probably paying for E3 in order to get the thick, rich version of PowerPoint, Word, Excel, etc. And so what I'll do is I'll just pick a random design to use for this, and I'm going to type in here, we'll make this a webinar. So this is how documents get created. I create the document, I fill it in, and I wind up going and saving that to the content repositories that Microsoft delivers in 365. That might be SharePoint or OneDrive. Most people do their personal stuff in OneDrive, and so I'm going to go in here to customer demos, and we're just going to say webinar. All right, so this is how all documents get created. We'll try save that again. Save. There we go. So I create documents inside of the Office platform, but we want that to be integrated into the Webex platform as well. So I'm going to fire up my Webex Teams. And what I've done is I've created a team here, a Cisco with Microsoft example, and I'm going to pull that document inside of Teams. Now, I have 2 options here. I can upload from my computer. And by the way, as an admin, you can turn either of these off. So I might, for example, say I only want people to upload content inside of 365. And so I'm going to go ahead and share from my SharePoint and OneDrive. And what this does is it goes and gets me not only the SharePoint view and the OneDrive view, but actually brings them together. So I've got OneDrive here as well as all my SharePoint sites. And I can navigate here into my customer demos. And right there at the top is this new webinar that I created. So I'm going to go ahead and click on open. Now, because of that intercompany piece that we talked about, we know that you, as a general rule, you probably want to share things with existing access, however it's set up in your OneDrive or your SharePoint. But because we could be also dealing with people outside of our organization, we give you an additional permissions panel that lets you go ahead and choose the permissions that are right for you. So I'm just going to turn everything on for the sake of this demo and click on apply. And now instead of uploading this content into the space, which might take a long time depending on your 150 meg spreadsheets, we actually embed it directly into the space without having to do an upload and without copying each time. So now I have my webinar. I can see that it's a OneDrive file, and for me to go in there and edit this thing is simply one click to bring up that content front and foremost inside of my client. So I've got my webinar here, but I can also, for example, go into some of the other things in other spaces. And for example, I can bring up this Word document. I can have actually as many of these documents open as I want at any one time, and you'll see that they are built into the Webex Teams experience. And of course, I can go in here and I can be co-editing with people who are in the space. So in order to show that, I have Alice Adams here. She's at a different company entirely. She's external to my organization. And she's sitting here in her Teams that I actually have running inside of a browser. And you'll see that she's actually not invited to that space that I'm in. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and add her because I want her to collaborate on this file. So actually, let me make sure I do the right one. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to click on people, and I'm going to add alice@lawrenson.com. So she's an external participant. I click go, and magically now inside of her client, what's going to happen is that space, as soon as I've actually hit enter, she is going to get added to that space, and it's going to show up in her list of spaces. She doesn't have to switch context. She has it natively inline. And the upside of this is that she can also go ahead and click on this file here. And even though she's in a browser, she's going to be brought into that same co-editing experience. So I'm over here. I'm looking at my thing, and I'm going to change this to this rocks and go play around with the second slide. And on her side, she's going to see, hey, there are people editing in here. I see that Jeremy is on this particular slide, and I'm over here. And it's a real-time co-editing experience intercompany on the same document. So that's the first integration that we're dealing, or that we're giving to users, and that's the ability to put your documents directly into Webex Teams, and with one click, bring those up for you to be able to edit. So that's the first big integration, and it's an integration that we find a ton of people are very interested in because documents live inside of the Microsoft environment. So we'll stop here for another poll question. We're very interested in understanding where it is that you actually spend your time. So I showed you the Webex Teams environment where we spend all of our time with the Webex and Cisco world editing and using Microsoft tools. But we're interested in what you're using today. Are you using basic SharePoint type of environments, or have you deployed Microsoft Teams or Cisco Webex Teams or Atlassian or somebody else's tools? We're very interested in what you're using.
All right, so I think we'll give folks a moment to answer those questions. But yeah, I mean, I think now we're seeing more, to your point, Jeremy, more of collaborating on documents via the chat, where before it was kind of like a round robin of email. Hey, please give me your edits. Give me your edits by this date. We want things more instantaneously. It's like, hey, I just posted a document, and why don't you go take a look at it as soon as you get my message and give me the edits. And it seems like that's just really a cultural thing that's the here and now of today at work.
Yeah, and it's one of the great things about 365 is it does allow you to do things like the OneDrive access between organizations, and by marrying it with our real-time meeting tools as well as our real-time Webex Teams tools for the chat portion of that, you really get the best of all worlds in a sort of single scenario.
Yeah, I agree.
So
we have, okay. So I'm looking at the polling results. I'll let you announce those, Jeremy.
Actually, I'm looking at a different screen, so go ahead.
Okay. So it looks like we have Webex Teams at 70%, Microsoft Teams at 55%, Slack at 5%, Skype for Business at 29%, and 15% other.
Oh, interesting. That's actually really interesting. I expected Slack to be a little bit higher, but I think
I did as well.
yeah, as it pertains to things like controlling your data, you know, being able to enforce policy, we're finding that a lot of organizations are sort of looking at, hey, what can Webex do for me? What can Teams do for me? Because they're realizing that there's a huge benefit in having a better security architecture than what they're used to.
Absolutely.
So the other thing I wanted to show you was the reverse, right? So we've shown how, look, I have Microsoft in Webex Teams. That's fantastic. But you know, this experience is not great. So even if I operate inside of Microsoft Teams and I go into my Word, Excel, PowerPoint, this is not PowerPoint, right? This is the web-based version of PowerPoint. And while it's great and I have access and I can co-edit, it's not everything it's cracked up to be. Right? I can pick it up in a window and that's fine. So the other thing that we've done, we haven't just built the Office applications into Webex Teams, we're building Webex Teams into the Office applications. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my original PowerPoint here on the left, and I'm going to put the Webex version of that on the right-hand side. And you'll notice, as I showed you before, that we can, you know, we can be doing co-editing across the two, and it's really great. But this gives me the full featured version that I've paid for in my E3. It's the thing that when I hit the present button, it goes, you know, it does what I expect. So what we've done is for people who are operating in this thick version of Office, we actually install Webex Teams functionality inside of the Office experience as well. And so the idea here is I'm going to sign in. First thing in the morning. It's automatically going to pass through the authentication to the operating system, so it knows, yeah, that is actually Jeremy who signed in. And now what I can do is I can actually pick that space and say, look, this Cisco with Microsoft space, I want that to be showing up in the document, so that I can say, you know, needs less green. And the people who are in the full Teams client on the other side, so if I go back to my Webex Teams, I can see, hey, this guy says needs less green. And so what I have is I have people who are first-class citizens in the Webex Teams client who are editing the content in their window. And I also have, similarly, the people who want to be first-class citizens in the Microsoft Office suite, which you paid good money to get, who are also now participating in the chat portion of that as well. So the idea here is however you work, and especially if you pay good money to use the Microsoft productivity tools, I want a good full fidelity experience inside of that environment. So we embed these add-ins into the Microsoft Office suite. So obviously I'm showing you PowerPoint here, but this is the same with Word and Excel. The idea is you can get that experience wherever you need to. So let's switch gears a second and talk a little bit more about Microsoft Teams. So there were a significant number of people who are busy trialing Microsoft Teams or who are busy starting to work with it in their environment. And once again, what Webex does for you is it gives you a great seamless interoperability for meetings, inter-organization, and part of that are going to be people who run the Cisco platform, as well as people who are running on the Microsoft platform. So what I have in the Microsoft environment is I have my demo Teams set up here, and I'm signed in. And what you can do from the Microsoft perspective is inside of Teams, and anybody can go ahead and do this, you can go to the Microsoft App Store. So I can go here into apps. And if you actually click on your More Apps button, you'll see that Webex is actually featured prominently in the App Store because there are a lot of folks who are actually using the integration. And what that gives you is the ability to have a couple of different integrations into your Microsoft experience. So I talked a little bit about how on a calendar I have the plugin and I can schedule there. I can also type in, as I mentioned, @Webex into that calendar as well. Well, I can also do the same thing here and mention the Webex bot in order to create an on-the-fly meeting reservation for people who are in my channel to be able to do. And in fact, I can click on the Webex ball and I have the option here to, as I said, share the instant link. I can type in a person's personal room ID or the room number or meeting number and publish that in here. And so you have a chat bot as well as a sort of UI to that chatbot that lets you do this sort of ad hoc, hey, we need to meet right now sort of environment. In addition to that, We also, in that same integration, have a tab integration that gives you the full power of Cisco Webex meeting scheduling inside of a team space. And so in this particular example, I can start a meeting right now and notify channel members that, hey, we're going to go live at this very second. I can join a particular existing meeting ID that I may happen to have, or I get from somebody else, for example, at a different organization. And I also have a great scheduling environment here where I can schedule a meeting, a variety of different types of meetings that we provide. We automatically fill in a ton of this detail. So in the traditional scheduling environments out of Microsoft Teams, there's a lot of filling in of a lot of this data that you have to do. And in our particular environment, we will automatically do that for you. I can also include all of the channel members. So I want to invite everybody who's in here. And then I can go ahead and schedule that meeting. And so I'm going to go ahead and hit the schedule button. And hopefully I hit it fast enough because I've scheduled the meeting for right now. Here we go. So my meeting shows up. It shows up on the the right-hand side in terms of the list of meetings that are happening today. It will automatically also synchronize into my Microsoft Outlook. It will also show up here inside of my calendar as soon as my calendar is synced with Exchange. So there it is. And so you get to join that meeting from a variety of different locations, including, of course, right here inside of the Microsoft Teams UI. If I happen to be running inside of Microsoft Outlook, which I don't have up at this point, I can click there. And of course, if I go into my calendar here, I have the option to be able to click the big green button wherever I happen to be. So this button is going to show up on the Microsoft Office side of the house. So in Exchange, it's going to show up in this calendar. It's going to show up in the integration that I showed you as well. There's going to be the green start button there. And of course, it's going to be mobile and everywhere else you want to be. And then in order for me to start that meeting, I simply go ahead and click start. And I should say also that it's going to also be inside of my Webex. So when I fire up my Outlook, one of the integrations that we've done with Microsoft on the Outlook side is that we share data between the Outlook application and what's happening inside of the Webex application. And now, because Outlook is running, I see my join button here inside of the Webex meeting. And of course, I would have got the toast when the meeting was about to start. And one click, and I get directly joined into that meeting. So a great way for you to be able to schedule inside of Teams, have that start button be available everywhere that you want to be. And as I mentioned earlier, with things like proximity, where it automatically detects me when I'm in a room and I want to start my meeting, it's actually automatically detecting the video device I'm sitting in front of. And if I join this meeting right now, it would take advantage of this. Extremely simple across the board, and it lights up functionality like the ease of use that I mentioned before in order for you to be able to have a much, much simpler experience than you typically have. Now, I should also mention that with every meeting comes interoperability services. So when I do schedule this meeting, as I mentioned at the beginning, I can join this meeting with whatever I have. Skype for Business. I can join it using a browser, using multiple different clients, a SIP endpoint, an HT23 endpoint. And that's the added benefit here of using Cisco as the meeting platform. You don't have to have your users scratch their head and say, well, hang on a second, who's meeting and what kind of device are they meeting on? So that's a demo of what we're doing inside of the Microsoft Teams environment in terms of making your experience even better. So we've shown you this. So the next question we have for you is, how are you currently collaborating to create and edit these documents internally? We have a lot of people who, various different ways. I can do what I did, which is save into my OneDrive and create the documents inside of your your Office application. I can edit these things inside of SharePoint. We're very interested in how you collaborate and create documents today.
Jeremy, one thing that I will say is that I've used both Microsoft and SharePoint and enterprise content management systems. Actually worked for Documentum for a while. And, sometimes customers are, especially in companies where you're creating like large standard operating procedures or manuals, they're using those enterprise content management tools. SharePoint also works for Microsoft Documents. But the good news is that we work with both those scenarios.
Yeah, and we work in what's becoming a much more common scenario, which is that external piece. So, you know, I want to be able to apply policy to my documents and control what I'm doing. But I also want my users, when they are signed into somebody else's team and they're working on documents that somebody else has, I want visibility into that stuff as well. So one of the major reasons that people look at our Teams product is that it works really great for managing content inside of your team, inside of your organization. But for example, if I invited one of the customers who's on this call into a Cisco-owned space, their IT department also gets to see what they're doing in my environment, which is groundbreaking from a policy perspective. Most customers that I talk to who are not on the Cisco side, their answer from security or from the policy people is, we don't allow external access because it's opaque, because they can't see what's happening. So the fact that we can see what you're doing, even if you're in the Cisco space created by me, is a massive differentiation for us.
Yeah, that visibility is huge.
So let me keep going, and we'll wrap this up quickly. I see we've got some responses back. It looks like most folks here are on the Microsoft side, and then a fairly significant portion, 22%, are still doing email, which I think is one of the things that people are trying specifically to get away from. This back and forth, and my personal favorite, turn track changes on, which I deplore. So
or hold a deadline in your subject space. I'm used to doing that.
Yeah, for sure. So why integrate WebEx meetings in Microsoft Teams, right? We talked about it already. A consistent, simple join from any device or app. Your users or the people you're inviting are not going to have to think, wait a minute, do I need interoperability services for that? What am I going to use? The seamless wireless sharing and meeting control, it is a true game changer when I can just sit down in a particular room and my button on my Mac lights up and I can just click share screen. I don't have to pair with anything, it magically works. And if I was in front of something like a WebEx board, my ability to do even more is there. So that exceedingly simple experience. The easy integration into your calendar. So I showed this, once I fired up my Outlook, that meeting invite was everywhere for me to be able to join. So regardless of how I operated my day, whether I worked inside of Outlook and somebody invited me from Teams, or in fact, whether I'm in front of a video endpoint, having that green join button show on the endpoint is a really big deal. And the integration into Exchange is core to what we do with Microsoft. And then lastly, obviously the ability to do this where some of your folks are going to be working, and that's inside of the Teams application itself. So why do this, right? We're finding that when it comes to high value interactions and where the content is being created and the direction of companies is being decided, they're happening inside of these meetings and they're happening with people externally. So this mix of external and internal users is a really big deal. Quality is also a big deal, right? We can all run our meetings in the cloud. That's fantastic. We provide options for you to get directly connected into our cloud, as do some of the other folks. But the big deal is we allow you to pull some of that content back, as I mentioned earlier, and do things like upshift to 1080p so that people who are on premise get an even better experience. And then in general, right, the best meetings start and they start on time and adjourn quickly. My ability to walk into a WebEx room and just say, start my meeting, radically simplifies the operations for me. And quite frankly, for people who are not in IT and don't like to mess with all of the complexity. And then in terms of Cisco Webex Teams itself, why would you do Teams? Well, it's highly, highly integrated. It's integrated from a provisioning perspective. So when somebody's created inside of my Active Directory, they can be created in Teams automatically. I have an even better join experience when I have a Cisco piece of software in front of me. And if it happens to be Webex Teams, not only do I get to join the meetings, but I get to see the content as well. My ability to walk in a room that has a WebEx board and go and start editing the content right away is, once again, one button click away, and that is a game changer for users. We easily integrate into your calendar. I sort of showed you this. We're everywhere that you want to be. The key here as well is that we're also in things like the iOS calendar. So we're built into native iOS. So if I get a meeting pop-up that happens inside of there, I can deep press and join my meeting without having to go into the invite and figure out which link I'm going to click. I get a much, much more seamless experience. And then we actually provide a better Office experience inside of Webex Teams than you even get inside of the Microsoft Teams product. That co-editing that I showed you with one click, I opened up a window and I was immediately editing. I could have multiple windows open. Those are all things that we do that actually improve on the Office experience inside of the Microsoft set. So with that, we're going to summarize this and I'm going to hand it back over. Right? We integrate Microsoft productivity tools into Cisco Webex Teams to give you the experience that we at Cisco have, which is a fantastically integrated, seamless, easy experience. Right? We connect teams regardless of what organization they're in. We connect to your calendars. When it's time to meet, right, you saw the pop-up. I can simply click on the pop-up and I can control the device that I happen to be sitting in front of. And we use that integrated hardware and software to make this stuff absolutely seamless for users. And then, of course, if you have Webex boards, you can be sitting up there whiteboarding. I can have people whiteboarding from Macs and PCs. And more importantly, the people who are on traditional video devices can also see what's happening in that whiteboard session. So we bring that to all of the different modalities that your users might be joining from. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Frank to talk about what's new, what we announced last week around Microsoft and Cisco interoperability.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. This is really great. So let's see. And so, as many of our customers are aware, in order to use Microsoft Teams on our Webex endpoints, you needed to have a third-party solution like Pexip, BlueJeans, or Poly, which is formerly Polycom, were the only CVI partners, and these are basically a certification that Microsoft created in order to use Microsoft Teams on third-party devices. Next slide, please. And we've heard loud and clear that customers were just begging to have better interoperability. And so what we announced last week is that Cisco and Microsoft have come together to deliver a better user experience. So Cisco will become a certified Microsoft CVI partner, and Webex meetings will work with Microsoft Teams room devices using web-based technologies. And then Microsoft Teams will work on Webex video room systems, also using modern web technologies. And this is basically part of a commitment to open standards that both Microsoft and Cisco have. And the end result for our customers is that this delivers flexible and frictionless collaboration and the best user experience to get things done. And so for Webex meetings customers who also happen to have Microsoft Teams that they're using for messaging or file sharing, so Webex meetings is available right inside of Microsoft Teams for a seamless schedule and join. And for Webex customers who might want to invite somebody in another organization that uses a Microsoft Teams room system, they can just seamlessly join your Webex meeting. And the benefit for our Microsoft Teams customers is you can use Cisco Webex video devices to join your Microsoft Teams meetings without having to use one of those third-party providers, because now Cisco is CVI certified. And you can register to join from on-premise or in the cloud from a registered Cisco Webex device, and it'll give you a rich, seamless meeting experience. And so there's basically two methods to join a Microsoft Teams meeting. There's the cloud video gateway. So this is the Cisco Webex experience. And so basically this works with Cisco or any standard video endpoints, and it's multi-screen with flexible layouts. You get a full roster list and meeting controls. You get one-way whiteboarding and sharing from a Webex board or a Desk Pro. You get one button to push join from a calendar and an easy configuration in the Webex Control Hub. And then for Webex devices, Microsoft Teams application, so this is the Microsoft experience, you get a web engine enabled devices, so Room Kits, Room Series, Webex boards, Desk Pro. You get a single screen with Microsoft Teams layout. You get a roster list, but it has the touchscreen only. You get basic controls like ending the call, muting, and volume. Still get the one button to push join from calendar, and you get Webex Cloud registered or Edge enabled. And so for the cloud gateway, there's the schedule and join. So the calendar integration provides the one button to push on Cisco video endpoints, one click to join from Microsoft desktop and mobile. In meeting, you get flexible multi-screen layouts. Microsoft Teams users see the respective layouts. You can receive and send content. And you have your meeting controls. You get a Cisco and Microsoft participants receive the full participant roster. And this is administered via the Webex Control Hub and Office 365. And then the Microsoft Web app, for schedule and join, you get calendar integration, and that gives you the one button to push on Cisco video endpoints, and one click to join from Microsoft desktop and mobile. And in meeting, the Microsoft Web app gives you single screen layouts so you can receive content, share, but the controls are limited. As we said, it's the ending call, local mute, and volume. And for deployment, Cisco video endpoints must be cloud registered or registered on-prem using the Webex Edge for devices. And again, the setup is administered via Webex Control Hub and Office 365 admin. So basically, the value of this for you is that no matter what collaboration platform you use, we're giving you a choice. We're trying to make this easy and frictionless, as we realize a lot of our customers are using both. And with that, we'll go to Q&A.
Cool, I'm going to stop sharing on this side.
Thank you, Jeremy.
So if you've got questions, please do put them in the QA panel inside of the meeting, and we will unmute. And as we said, we also have Michael here to help us answer questions. So I'm going to go and see if there are questions here. So let me see.
So Jeremy, there were a couple questions. I assigned those to you if you wouldn't mind answering a couple of them, maybe verbally.
Okay. Okay.
So there's around, can you join a Webex meeting using the Microsoft Surface Hub?
So you currently cannot join a Webex meeting using the Surface Hub. And this is something that we encourage you to go talk to the Microsoft folks about. So I was actually out at Microsoft Ignite last week, and Surface Hub is actually running something called Windows Teams. I know it's very confusing. They like to call everything the same thing. And Windows Teams is actually built on Windows Mobile. So it does not support WebRTC. There will be a new version of the Surface Hub coming out sometime in 2020 that will presumably run a more full version of Windows. And at that point, you'll be able to run, for example, the Webex app on that device. But the current Surface Hubs, as well as the Surface Hubs 2S, are actually running a Windows Mobile version of software, and that does not have the WebRTC capability in. So that's that one. Will it be possible to have a PowerPoint presentation on a Cisco device, i.e. the board, while offline? There are scenarios where there's bad Wi-Fi connection while presenting. So the Webex board is a really good example of this. There are plans, since the Webex board is actually able to, for example, join the Microsoft Teams meeting using WebRTC capability. It does have a browser that's built in. So we are investigating options to be able to do things like pulling up content on those boards. Those of you who know, when you have a device, you can actually stand next to the board and open a space and get access to be able to see your slides today. So the various different ways that you can present on a board right now, or you can plug in HDMI, right? So if you're offline entirely and you have an HDMI connection on your machine or on your mobile device, you can actually plug directly into the board and share natively right there. If you are connected on your mobile or your laptop and you're connected via the internet, so you're not on a Wi-Fi local LAN, you can actually share via the internet that way as well. So our wireless sharing doesn't have to be on the same network. And then, as I said, there's some really interesting options that are coming up based on the fact that we have this web technology on those boards. There's actually quite a bit that we are busy looking at. But once again, we have to look at, for example, if I have a 2 gigabyte, presentation, that's not going to scale particularly well. So we're busy looking at that sort of stuff right now. But native share locally, you can share via the internet if you're not on a local network. And then beyond that, we're looking at some other options as well.
So there's a couple other questions that are around the cost of the gateway service, and I'll answer that question verbally. It's already been answered a couple times, I think, in the chat, in the Q&A panel. But we are currently today still working with the offers team to come up and finalize some pricing. So look forward to seeing some pricing available for the service in early 2020.
Yeah, and Michael, one of the questions on there is, when will this be available? And I guess that's the answer to that question as well, is early 2020.
We are planning to have this available Q2 calendar 2020. So that's about the time frame for GA. Once we get to early 2020, give us a couple more months here, we'll be able to get to a little bit more finer grain date, probably a month. We have a target month right now, but currently today what we're saying is Q2 calendar 2020. Now, that's for both of the Microsoft Teams CVI, so the Cloud Video Interop, which is the gateway service that you talked about, in addition to also maybe a couple weeks earlier, maybe a month earlier, we'll be able to get the Microsoft Teams direct connection from our web engine enabled endpoints. But I wanted to make sure that we understood that it was all only the endpoints that are the latest versions, latest generation that can do the web engine will be able to connect to a Microsoft Teams meeting web app using the WebRTC standard.
Great. It seems like we're getting a lot of questions on whether this will support AirPlay in iOS.
Yep, so I can answer some of that. So AirPlay on the iOS side is a licensed protocol that Apple uses. It also has very little control from an IT perspective. So we're actually using Cisco's own proximity wireless sharing that's available across devices, as well as the little sharing device that I talked about, specifically because you have a lot more control over what's possible. So as long as you have a Cisco app installed on your mobile device, obviously in this particular case, iOS, you're going to be able to share wirelessly from that device. We do understand that Apple has a slightly less, there's fewer steps in the Apple sharing piece, but there are a lot of questions around control of who can and can't share and what information they have access to.
So it looks like there's somebody raising their hand on the, I think it's maybe for a question. It looks like Anoop Kakanen. Is that something that somebody can unmute them for? So if Anoop, you want to answer or ask a question, I think I can unmute you. No, I cannot. So maybe somebody can unmute him.
Actually, I think we need to have him send through the question and answer panel.
Yeah, so Anoop, if you're raising your hand to ask a question, please submit the question via the Q&A panel. Looks like we're seeing also a couple different questions, Jeremy, on the SBC integration, so our Cube integration and the certification of that for Microsoft Teams calling.
Yeah, so Microsoft Teams calling has something called Direct Connect. And in the Direct Connect model, when you are delivering dial tone into the Teams environment, it's essentially a trunk side integration. They have a set of vendors that they support for an SBC functionality. Part of the announcement that we made last week was that we'll also that they will support the SBC connectivity into the Cisco Cube. So you can deploy, or if you already have a Cube deployed on premise, you can essentially create a direct SIP trunk between that cube and the Microsoft Teams phone system integration. And then obviously whatever happens behind the cube is up for however you want to connect it, whether that be trunks to give you dial tone, or whether that happens to be connected into a UC manager. But that was also one of the things that was announced last week, is us certifying the Cisco Cube SBC for direct routing on Microsoft.
There was a question, I'm going to answer it verbally. How do we see the Zoom Interop, or is this only from Teams meeting room systems? And I'm going to answer that, I think, two different ways. One way, of course, is that the Zoom Interop, it looks like to us, is that they're going to provide the ability to join via WebRTC or the web app, and also they will be able to join in Microsoft Teams room to the Zoom meeting web app as well. So web app both directions. We did announce the same thing, but we also added a third one, which is the Cloud Video Interop, which will have a higher degree of user experience. So like Frank said earlier, being able to have full multi-streaming, to be able to see multiple different layouts on your endpoints, to use both monitors, so you don't have to have just one monitor being used for the web app, which is a limitation of the Chromium web app, effectively. And I think we're almost out of time here. So
I think we are. Yeah, I think we are almost out of time. So I just wanted to thank Jeremy and Michael for joining us today, and thanks to all of you out there who joined this webinar. We will be sending the presentation out to everyone who registered. So just wanted to say thanks to everyone. Thanks for joining today.